everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Berman. I'm with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors in my day job. But in my other part of my life, I'm an adjunct professor here at the business school, teaching a class on global philanthropy. And I'm also the mother of a Columbia Business School student class of 2021. No, 2020.
Who you didn't invite to this.
2020. Whom I forgot to invite today. Yes, right. So we're going to be very open and honest in this session. So a couple of things. First, let me introduce our two panelists, but also before we jump into that, I want to sort of answer the question that you might be having. Why is there value in having a session about women and philanthropy? Here we are at a business school where the enterprise model and capital markets are the real engines for change. And I think what you're going to be hearing as we share some of our experiences and ideas with these two remarkable women leaders is that philanthropy today has a set of tools available to make social change unparalleled really in history. And it ranges from traditional donating to impact investing, to advocacy, to political campaigning, and to using social media and other forms of communication to build movements and empower people. Now, you can't do all of those things necessarily with the same vehicle, but they are all part of how you can use resources to make change. So we're living in a very exciting time. There's more philanthropy, certainly not only in the US, but in other major emerging economies like India and China than there has ever been before. Goodness knows there's more need of it than ever before, but the resources that are coming into the sectors of philanthropy, impact investing, and advocacy and movement building are profound. And women are in the lead for many of these initiatives. There are estimates that already women around the world control 30 to 40% of wealth, although the equity of how that wealth is distributed varies from country to country. And in the US, for example, women are estimated to control half the wealth, as it should be, right? And in the coming decades, estimates are that women will control 2/3 of the world's wealth as part of the intergenerational transfer of wealth and the emergence of women-owned businesses in the developing economies. So we have two experts to tell us how they began their journey into this field, why the way women approach giving and investing holds so much promise for so many issues, and why all of us want to be investing in women. So to my right, your left, is Mona Sinha, who's a Columbia Business School alumna, and she has leveraged her global career in finance and marketing to found and lead initiatives that build women's leadership around the world. She's an active financial investor in women's businesses as well, serves on a wide variety of boards, including the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise here at Columbia. And most notably for this conversation, she is the chair of a very important movement called Women Moving Millions. And to my left is Elizabeth Carlock-Phillips, who is a social entrepreneur, millennial philanthropist, and leader of a very significant and wide-ranging philanthropic enterprise that includes a foundation as well as other vehicles. Based on her experience founding a line of jewelry in Uganda, she has developed an e-commerce brand of jewelry that benefits refugee women around the world. She has also led the Phillips Foundation to have a total impact portfolio strategy and is one of the co-founders of an organization called The Impact, which provides resources and co-investing ideas for impact investors in family offices and foundations around the world. So and she is also on the board of Women Moving Millions. So both of these women bring a lot of experience, expertise, and creativity to the way that they're tackling problems. So Mona, if I could start with you, what led you to focus your work both as an investor and as a philanthropist and as a movement builder on the role of women and women's leadership?
Well, many of you who know me know that I graduated from Smith College. And if anybody knows what Smith College is all about, it's a lovely antidote to the old boys network. We call ourselves the ageless girls network. So early on, I grew up as the youngest of 3 girls in India and really saw the power of women, largely silently in my growing up years, because women did a lot but took very little credit for it. I think coming to Smith and being exposed to the wide variety of leadership roles that women were taking all over campus, whether it be in student, government, or faculty members with, doing incredible research in spaces. And then going into a very male-dominated workplace, because I went to work on Wall Street, I realized that women actually had a different skill set than many men. I mean, we could run the models, we could do the numbers, we could do all of that we all do at business school. But I think our approach to business and our approach to building and creating, we are creators after all, right, comes from a mindset of growth and comes from a mindset of collaboration, which sets us apart. And these are skills that I've seen my entire career, whether I invest in women or work with women. And I think that's what also led both Elizabeth and myself to Women Moving Millions, which is, it's a relatively small organization now, but it's sort of poised to grow. And it's 250 women who commit big and bold to supporting other women. And that's a pretty unique place to be, because I don't think there are too many organizations like that. And as Melissa mentioned, it starts with philanthropy. So a lot of us started out doing grants. And it's shifted along that spectrum to say, how do we live our lives honoring our values? So how do we live our lives by not just being philanthropic and giving grants, but investing our capital where it counts, buying products from organizations that are meaningful. Many of you went to a panel on ESG, and that's definitely a part of it. So making a conscious choice of living our lives and investing our capital where our values lie.
Thank you. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got into this leadership role?
And how did I end up on this stage with Mona and Melissa? What an honor to be here. Hey, y'all. How's lunch? How's it going? Thanks for having us and for bringing this topic to your conference. A little background on me and the Phillips Foundation. I had been a social entrepreneur in the fashion sector, and when my husband and I married pretty young, we got the call to move back to his hometown, which is Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm from Dallas, Texas, grew up in Dallas, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia. So I say y'all. Anyone else say y'all? Okay, awesome. So when we got the call to move back to Greensboro, my husband's grandfather had died, and he had to help settle the estate, stabilize the operating companies, and through the settlement of the estate, we had a newly endowed foundation. So that's the Phillips Foundation, which is part of a broader family philanthropy practice. But for the Phillips Foundation specifically, I took that role on at 24, and I told the trustees at the time, I want to take a place-based approach and dig in deep to what are the once-in-a-generation opportunities to move the dial or solve something in this community where the family wealth was created and where there's a headquarters that remains there today. And then secondly, I don't want to do this more traditional philanthropy model, perhaps I call it philanthropy, where it's a lot of money to little money to a lot of different things, but let's give a lot of money to these a dozen or so once-in-a-generation grants. And we were issue agnostic in that approach since our focus was more geographic in nature. It ranged for everything from reducing chronic homelessness by 98% in 3 years to launching a performing arts center campaign because the downtown of Greensboro had been struggling to revitalize, and that is right now really anchoring a revitalization downtown, some work in education reform. So about a dozen of these, and then on that journey, we realized, there's my mic, sorry. On that journey, we realized, wow, we're spending so much focus on the 5%. As a private foundation, the IRS mandates that you must distribute at least 5% of your total assets annually to 501c3s or nonprofits. But we're turning a blind eye, so to speak, to the other 95%. And being newer to the philanthropic side of the table, this was just kind of crazy to me that in my role as an executive director, that I wouldn't be expected to steward 100% of this platform. And mathematically, there's a lot more capital and power with the other 95%. So I went to our financial advisors in North Carolina and said, I really want to understand how we can align our values with this investment capital. We get quarterly updates from y'all about what may or may not happen in Japan, and you talk about that for 30 minutes and how that's going to affect the economy. I just don't understand how this relates to impact. And they stopped talking to me and started talking to my husband, because he's the board chair. I kind of got a pat on the back, like cute little millennial who cares about values. That's so cliche. And so I fired them. And then we... Thank you. I always get applause for that. People feel that frustration. Have you been there too? So anyways, we underwent this national RFP process and landed with some financial advisors who actually had 10 years of experience, because a client 10 years prior to us, who's actually another co-founder of the Impact, she had said, I want my money to do more for me than just make more money. So they had to move firms themselves to serve their 8 billion AUM of impact-oriented clients. And we were able to go from 7% values aligned to 74% values aligned across our full corpus, so across asset classes, in about 3 quarters. Now we're sitting at about 95% values alignment across the portfolio. And so I like to tell people, you know, it's not rocket science.
Right.
It's just finding the right partners.
Right.
And so we were very fortunate to have found the right advisors to guide us through that. And then, you know, I came to know Women Moving Millions through my role at the foundation and some of the founding members of that network. And I started coming to Summit and learning these terms like gender lens and intersectionality. And it's in community and in these convenings where I've personally gotten the most value on my journey in the last 8 years.
Great, thank you. So, Mona, I'd like you to tell us a little more, please, about Women Moving Millions. Why does that organization need to exist, so to speak? What has it inspired?
So the vision of our organization is that we will have a gender equal world. If you followed any of the research that came out of Davos, they say it's going to take 108 years for us to get there, which to us is just unacceptable. In 108 years, we won't even be alive anymore. So I'd like to see some of that needle move in my lifetime, and certainly, you know, for the younger generation. So we are a group of women, and we've gotten a lot of interest now to go global, which is great. We've been largely US-based. It's women who have either inherited wealth or have made their wealth very consciously and are determined to give away a certain percent. So in a way, it's a direct response to the Gates and Buffett's Giving Pledge option that was put out there, because when that released, and I think it was 2006 or 7, it was really a bunch of men who said, yeah, I'm raising my hand, and by the way, here's my wife. And we were like, well, you know, there are a bunch of women that can do this too. So it was a call to action that came out as a campaign in 2007 to ask if there were 100 women out there that would pledge $1 million each to women's funds. Well, it ended up there were 180 women out there who raised $180 million.
Thank you.
And once that happened, we realized a few things. A, that we actually really liked learning in community. As Elizabeth said, we have an annual convening where we put a lot of issues up on the stage, and we like debating these things, and we like learning in community and finding issues where we can move the needle. So I call ourselves philanthro activists, because really that's what we are. And the other thing we do is we learn in community. So we've actually launched something we call a learning lab, where small groups of our members get together and we push each other and we say, you know, are you doing enough? What is your philosophy about investing in women? Have you actually figured this out? And it's amazing when you get a small group together in an intimate setting for 4 days, what actually comes out of it. So some of the things that I've invested in that I never in my life thought I would. So I invested in what the Constitution means to me, which is a play on Broadway. And it's been very profitable, which is amazing. I remember when I took that to our investment advisors, they were like, what, Broadway? Broadway never makes money. Well, guess what? We are. So I think we're changing the paradigm of things that people take for granted. Elizabeth said, even with our advisors, the same thing. When I pushed our investment advisors to look at impact, and specifically in gender, there was a lot of the, turning around and looking at my husband and saying, well, what do you think? And he'd say, what she thinks. So I think, part of it is also not our own education, but the education of people around us. We talk about these things at the dinner table, so the next generation knows about it. One of the gifts I give to my kids when they go to college is that they can pick one organization that they want to support. And it's amazing the discussion that actually happens around it. And you think, a bunch of 18-year-olds wouldn't know what to do. Well, you may be surprised. And some of the best programs I funded, I've been introduced to by my kids. So that's what we do. The other bold vision we have is that the ecosystem around us needs to also be educated. We have the unique ability of putting our money where our mouth is, which is great. And so sometimes, we identify a situation that is really lacking in this gender lens outlook. We use our combined leverage to go out there and say, you need to change this. So that's what we do. And, as women, we also have a lot of fun. We put our values to work, and we learn in community. We have a younger generation coming up behind us, which is great, and we learn from each other. I've learned a lot from Elizabeth that I never probably would have been exposed to if I just stuck to people my age, and that's been great value added.
Thank you. And what has it meant to you to be part of that network?
Oh, well, it's been so helpful in my journey as a philanthropist, but also what I've seen being a newer member. Mona's been a member a lot longer than I have, but this shift now where the members are wanting to think beyond just their philanthropic portfolio and how can they activate all of their assets for impact and with a gender lens. And so this shift now within the network to understand kind of the broader approach to impact investing and all the vehicles that exist, like you were alluding to in your introductory remarks, that's now a part of the conversation where perhaps historically it started as, oh, what can we donate to? And now what we're realizing, and the research just came out again, sadly, the statistics not changed much, that less than 5% of venture capital in this country goes to women-led or founded enterprises. And so we're now realizing it's not just our philanthropic capital, but our investment capital. And women deserve dignified investment capital too, and not just charity checks. And I think we're going to see a huge explosion in regards to that, not just within Women Moving Millions, but people who are coming to that awareness more broadly.
Yeah, that's sort of, Elizabeth sort of exemplifies in many ways the way that many people of the generation represented by many of you in this room thinks about the world, which is that there are not two compartments, one of which is the for-profit compartment and the other one of which is the for good compartment. There's really only one compartment. We really only have one life, and we really can only have one set of values, right?
Yeah, and in generations previous, my husband's grandfather, for example, there's this thinking of you make your money over here and you give it away over here, or you make money for half your life, then the second half you think about giving back. And I think there are reasons behind this and research behind this, but I think for millennials and younger, we don't see that bifurcation. It's more of a doing well as we do good approach, because we now live in a world where there is enough transparency and capital markets have evolved enough to better understand what our money is doing in the world. And so ESG factors and socially responsible investing have been around for a while, but there's now more data and transparency to at least have confidence that you're doing no harm with your capital, and then proactively investing for positive impact metrics where that's available. We're getting there.
Right, and there are opportunities to invest not only with a gender lens through services like Equileap, et cetera, but there are also increasingly opportunities to invest in market rate vehicles that help support the creative economy, which also tends to help a lot of women. So there's a lot out there. What there isn't enough out there, by the way, for those of you thinking about what to do later, there are not enough women who are financial advisors. The conversations that both Mona and Elizabeth have had would not perhaps have happened if even one member of the team from the investment organization looked like the three of us up here on stage. So that's a gap that can be filled.
And with the generational wealth transfer that's about to occur over the next several decades, estimated to be about 30 trillion, I think, is some number I've seen. 70% of that will land in the hands of women.
Yeah.
So millennial women are about to own the world.
Right.
And I think some of the financial advisory firms are behind in that. They're not hiring their teams to look like the clients they want and should be positioned to serve over the next few years, decades. Sorry.
Right.
And
So-
women in general are going to be able to leverage $74 trillion in the next very near future. So that's a huge amount of money. And I think that has sort of, told this value investing segment that they need to get their act together.
And many of those women will not look like some of the traditional wealthy investors of the past. They will be a much more diverse group of individuals, gender notwithstanding. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I want to ask about one question that is often looked at sometimes as a plus about how women invest and donate, and sometimes as a minus. As Mona mentioned, studies show, and our lives show us probably, that women are very sort of community and collaboration minded. They tend to be much more open to the idea of doing things in partnership with others, to be willing to listen to the voices of others, and they tend, therefore, often to spread their investing and their philanthropy out. What did you call it?
Philanthropy.
Philanthropy, yes. Because they see more of they're looking at more of a system than an individual opportunity that they're selecting. And sometimes that's a very good thing, and other times it seems to mean that women are willing to take less risk with their investing and their philanthropy and not make such big bets. Do you think that those characterizations are changing or were ever true? Or do you think the advantages of being more spread out rather than saying, this is my one thing, here's $50 million for that building?
Well,
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want to do. It's we find in our community that there's this whole buzz about systems change, right? But not talking about changing one organizations, but how do you understand that many pieces of it come together that can actually change a system? And I think you see this at the Tamer program, where in social justice, where we've been going, to prisons and talking about prison reform and bringing parties together that are unlikely playmates, if you will. So you're looking at future business leaders and talking about inmates in the prison system and saying, there could be a match here when people come out, because we need more people in the workplace. So I think that in terms of systems change, you're definitely looking at investments that are looking across many factors and looking at an end goal of what needs to be achieved. But at the same time, we also have our passion projects, and that's fine. If you want to invest in a small community project that's really near and dear to your heart and that's going to make a change in a community, that's great. I grew up in Calcutta, and one of my most favorite investments is in Calcutta. And it's not because I think it's going to change the whole world, but it's going to change that community. So that's important. So I don't think you have to be of one particular mind or have one strategy. I think it's fine to do different things. And on the collaborative field, I think you can achieve a lot more by collaborating. I think women are natural collaborators. We learn a lot from each other. And by collaboration, it's not necessarily meaning that you all do the same thing, right? It means you can approach a problem from several different angles so that your end result is stronger than if you had done it alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a both and, not an either or. There are a lot of strategies, collective impact models out there that are very needed. I will say, though, I feel like the term gender lens has gotten a little bit hijacked to mean, from the financial services side, women investing in women or just investing in something that's a product for women.
Right.
When in fact, within the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it's number 5 as its own goal, which there's a lot of good reason for that, but I see gender lens as more up here, literally a lens you see all of these other categories and issue areas through, because every problem is a gendered problem.
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, I think there's more and more talk about how climate change inadvertently affects women more so than men. The men, I can't think of a specific example right now, but they'll migrate and leave families behind, or villages that get destroyed because of natural disaster. It disproportionately affects women. So that's a gendered issue. I mean, you can take each of those SDGs and apply a gender lens. And that's where intersectionality, it's not so black and white, which is maybe how the information was positioned to have us think about it in the past.
Right. So one of the things I want to ask about quickly before asking each of you for sort of what you'd like to have as your final kind of comments before we go to the Q&A portion of the program is, there have been a lot of attacks recently in the media, protests at museums, the philanthropists in France who, put together huge amounts of money to help rebuild Notre Dame got a lot of criticism. The MIT Media Lab is in serious trouble, and maybe the president of MIT too. And the issue that's coming up is both whose money is okay, which we've heard before, of course, but also why is it that people with privilege can set the agenda for people who don't have that privilege? And that's a different kind of question about philanthropy and investing. And I would love to hear the take that the two of you have on that. I don't know who wants to go into that
Stirring
first.
the pot, are we, Melissa?
I am sorry, I was well behaved for at least 20 minutes.
Well, I think it's about what you define privilege as, right? I mean, I didn't grow up with a ton of inherited wealth, but I earned it. And I think it's my privilege to say that I'm going to intentionally give it away, right? I think in the old systems where you saw really patriarchy, right, establish their legacies through buildings and naming and all of that, times have changed. I think, you would never see a panel like this, for example, I would say 20 years ago, up here on stage talking about women. I think any philanthropy is welcome. One of the things I read a lot of criticism about the Notre Dame thing, why couldn't we just turn around and say thank you to people who are willing to save, Notre Dame that meant so much to so many people? Why do we have to criticize that? Why can't it be a also and instead of only this and only that? So I think the patriarchy has shifted. I think you can see from us sitting here that people are making choices that are different. We have a lot of younger members who are coming into our organization that haven't decided where they're going to leverage their wealth, but want to learn about what the opportunities are. We're having discussions about border issues and deportation. We are talking about transgender rights. We're talking about really values-based investing. And I think that's very different from what's being discussed out there. So, if people want to bash philanthropists, sure they can, but I just would like to say that a lot of stuff would never happen if we just left it to government and investment. Because as I said, we're sort of, filling those holes where these things fall apart. So structurally, we are looking at changing systems, and every piece has a role to play.
Absolutely, and I'll add to that, and what you're saying about how philanthropy sometimes has seen its role as filling in gaps where government is failing. But I've seen more, and in our own practice, we look at philanthropy more as risk capital.
Yeah.
Governments can't gamble with taxpayer dollars and try something new. That's what we should be funding. We should be okay funding failure, because that's a lesson learned that then taxpayer dollars don't have to learn, or municipalities or states or federal government don't have to learn. So the lessons should be learned on our dime. We should experiment responsibly, don't get me wrong, but piloting things, creating proof of concept that can then scale up through public funds is a unique role that philanthropy is positioned to play. And so, especially with institutional philanthropy, foundation execs are starting to realize that's more of a role we need to lean into, and philanthropy can be very powerful and effective at a global scale with that paradigm shift.
Great. Having raised this issue, I would sort of say that the alternative to a lot of private philanthropy would simply be that that more money would flow into the public sector. In some ways, that could be a very good thing. But the concentration of power that that would lead to is in many ways perhaps as bad as the concentration of power in the hands of wealth holders. And it was not the public sector that brought us the civil rights movement, and it was not the public sector that brought us the climate change movement. It was, in fact, a woman named Rachel Carson. So with that, I think we're ready to get some of the questions that you all have been sending, I hope, to the app, and that Gwen is going to throw at us.
Try to distill some of these questions. Elizabeth, just to follow up what you were saying about grants being the risk capital. For your investment portfolio that you are trying to have full impact, do you adjust your rate of return that you expect? If you get your principal back, is that sufficient? How do you look at that?
Yes, great question. So we oftentimes will implement PRIs, program-related investments, where the return expectation is that will be concessionary. We go into those opportunities with the social impact first and the financial return component second. Sometimes you get 0% return, sometimes you get 120% return, but that's not the goal. That's just what that specific issue or organization needed to scale. So we'll accomplish that sometimes through debt vehicles like low interest loans that are more 2 or 3% versus market rate loans you would get through a bank. We partner a lot of times with CDFIs. So we're not getting rich off of that category of impact investment. And then we also have market rate investments, which in philanthropic terms, MRIs, mission-related investments that sit in our corpus portfolio, where as fiduciaries of an endowed foundation, we have to consider the financial return component first, but we only enter into those investments if there's also a social return. So PRI, MRI is the way we talk about it in private philanthropy. And absolutely, it's concessionary and market rate, both and.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to submit the questions through the app. I'm actually going to have Aisha come ask her questions that she submitted to the app.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Aisha, and I work with rural communities on a 5-cent school lunch that gets parents paying for it day one and completely funding it all on their own after 3 years, making the community self-sustaining. I thank you for bringing up patriarchy and also how they defined how they defined their legacy with their wealth. How are the women in women moving millions defining the legacy that they want to build in the future, in the next 10 years, in the next 50 years?
I think the legacy would be to have a gender equal world. That would be our shared legacy. But I think specifically, we all have issue areas that we're passionate about, and we look to do the best we can in moving the needle in those areas. I know it's a broad answer, but we have so many different areas that we invest in that it's hard to pick on one legacy. And if there is one, it really is to bring about more equality.
Right. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the presentation today. It's really inspiring to every one of us. I'm Lulu, I'm an EMPA student. Right now, the opportunity zone is a very hot topic in the country. Like we have 8,700 opportunity zones. We observe an obvious gap in the investing. Right now, it seems to be more focused on the real estate side, but the smaller business in the local community may not be getting enough attraction on the capital side. But maybe foundation or some other more philanthropy in nature kind of organization can fill in this gap. Just wondering, have you been considering investing in the local business in those opportunity zones? Thank you.
So I can't say specifically if our members have invested in those zones, but I will say that I'd say 100% of our members do local investing as well as sort of global change. Like I was saying, you can invest in scale to have a systems change approach, but you also invest in smaller projects at the local level. So I can't specifically say if they've been in opportunity zones, but I would guess that if we did a little survey, we would find, yes, there have been some.
Yeah, I think that part of the conversation is coming to light. Our foundation has a program called the Impact Investing Think Tank, and we just hosted a symposium last month on the opportunity and opportunity zones, and we brought in some people who are behind pushing that legislation through, and they're still very bullish on the movement. However, philanthropy does have a major role to play in that gap filling that you mentioned at the local level, because a lot of real estate investors are still looking at it as, okay, how do I make this deal work? And in certain cases, it's not just about the numbers. So how can philanthropy come to the table and make a collective impact approach to a lot of these projects? And now people are starting to talk about not just the real estate, but also how do you invest on the private equity side in the small businesses that exist in the OZs? Great question.
Yeah, I agree. And I think some philanthropies, community foundations in these areas might have the opportunity to help try and aggregate some of these investment opportunities, so that, because for some investors, they're just not staffed or structured to make a lot of small investments and do due diligence each and every one of them. But if they can be packaged together, and philanthropy might kind of de-risk a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a reminder to submit your question through the app if you can. The next question is, how do we attract more next generation wealth, such as tech wealth and millennial entrepreneurs who have earned money quickly, and particularly women, to start their giving with new strategies to philanthropy?
Elizabeth?
Well, I guess that one gets tossed to the millennial. I'm seeing a lot of people in my peer group forming these organizations like The Impact, which isn't just young families, it's multi-generational now, but it was founded by Justin Rockefeller and Josh Cohen and Liesl Pritzker-Simmons, and a third generation member of the Hyundai family in Korea, and then we got to jump in there at a certain point, and that's where a lot of this real learning happens, where you feel like you're in a safe space to share and learn together and just admit, like, do you know what you're doing? No, okay, me either. Like, who's your financial advisor? I just fired mine. I need to call somebody. You know? So that's just really helpful in the learning journey. And then same thing with going back to Women Moving Millions, which is embracing some of the original members' daughters and nieces, who are now also joining the board. It truly is a multi-generational learning environment, because it does go both ways, and we learn so much from people who have been in this game way longer than we have. But I think just being vulnerable and admitting, like, we don't know sometimes, and reaching out to each other and learning together is really gonna grow the field the quickest. I will also say, we have an Impact Fellows program at the foundation for MBA and MPA students. And that's our way of trying to pay it forward. A program like that is something I wish I could have participated in my early 20s, to just get an understanding of the field. And so things like that as well. Things like this center existing. When I went to college, there wasn't a lot of these, Sorensen Impact Center at University of Utah, this Social Enterprise Center here at Columbia. What a wonderful opportunity, speaking to the students, you have to actually study this. Because otherwise, you just learn as you go and then have to hire RPA, and they're kind of expensive. You can learn it that way too, but I just think it's great that this is being taught now.
Yeah. I think having the conversations is critical. I see this next generation as being so driven by what's needed in the world and having much less bias than what I saw growing up, for sure. Having that conversation, having the research that's being done now to back up some of the things that this world needs. And it doesn't, I always tell people, philanthropy doesn't mean you have to have $1 million to give away, right? You can start by giving $5 back to the college that you graduated from. That's philanthropy too. Or you can start by mentoring somebody who needs your help in an area that you're an expert in. So it's starting with those small steps that gets you to where you can talk about things like systems change and values investing and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and we're seeing that educational component start younger and younger. Phillips Foundation is launching later this fall a platform called Give As We Grow, which is engineered to equip children as young as 3 on generosity and giving. And we've partnered with Sesame Street on that content, because my children, who are 7, 4, and 2, are much more likely to listen to Elmo about creating spend, save, and share jars than they are myself or my husband. And then over time, there's content that is more relevant to older ages and stages. But then there's also a tracking component to the platform where you can put in, my oldest son gave $4 to the summer camp he enjoyed at the Children's Museum in Greensboro one year. And I wrote it down because I thought, I don't want to forget how meaningful that was to him at that age, and it was out of his piggy bank. And so philanthropy should be democratized in that sense, where there's resources and education around how to be generous, where to go volunteer, what to do with your time, treasure, talent, and now ties is kind of the fourth category. How can you use your ties, your network, social media to spread awareness on issues? That's all going to be a huge part of this next generation when I think about next gen as my kids.
Yeah.
And then maybe one last question. It seems that women have really been leading the charge in advocacy and public policy the past few years. And how can you use philanthropy to promote advocacy or the values-based ideas that you discussed? And how can you use philanthropy to promote women in general in leadership roles? I think Melinda Gates just announced a big gift toward that end. And do you have any thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, so our fundamental belief is that women are the agents of change, right? Because we've heard all of this, you know, when you empower a woman, she's helping her family, she's helping her community, she's helping her village, and so on and so forth. And that's largely true. And that's kind of the basis for why our organization funds the way it does, because we believe that if we actually empower a woman, then the change that's going to happen is going to be much greater than just that one person. So that's the fundamental belief. The other piece is actually the fun activism part that I talked about, because I think as an unusual group where we do have money to put where our values are, we can rile up a few issues. You know, we've been a voice in the whole climate change activity. We've been an active participant with Hewlett, with the Energy Foundation, with all of these big organizations that are putting together these strategies that are going to really matter in shaping the conversation around climate change. And nobody had talked about gender. And so, you know, we were in there saying, okay, let's talk about where women come in. How is it affecting the lives of women across the world? How is this connected with migration, the intersectionality that Elizabeth talked about? You know, how is it affecting agriculture? You know, you move from there to say, well, guess what? Women don't own land, so maybe we should be talking about land rights. So you see where the threads come in. So it's kind of, you start with one, but then you find that they're all connected. And in terms of leveraging women in leadership, that's what we do. I think when we look at, you know, this group as being catalysts, because when we educate ourselves to understand the issues and how best we can leverage them, these people will then go out into their communities and kind of leverage the people around them and, you know, in the circles and really inspire other people to do similar things. And, you know, it's breaking the stereotypes as well. I mean, trust me, when Melinda Gates made her announcement, she had a lot of input from many people. And it's important for us not to be so arrogant to call ourselves a movement, but actually be supporting the movement. And everyone understanding sort of what role they play in this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in thinking of advocacy as movement building, an example came to mind within our grant portfolio where we put the first $5 million into what's going to be a almost $80 million public-private partnership on this performing arts center in downtown Greensboro. But what we realized is they didn't just need a check to launch that campaign, but the messaging needed to shift. And this is a pretty non-controversial example to provide in regards to this. But we, my husband and I, and then some co-chairs, we mobilized 300 couples under the age of 50 to change the face of this project because it had gotten very political at city council meetings. So we mobilized people that were younger, going to city council meetings to talk about why this project mattered, for why they want to stay in Greensboro because the downtown's going to revitalize and be a great place to raise a family. Why it really is important for children in Guilford County schools to have a quality performing arts center to attend and go to field trips and see performances and things like that. We also had members of, we called it Generation GPAC, Greensboro Performing Arts Center, who would write op-eds to the newspaper, but as a younger face. So we changed the narrative from old rich white people who want a place to go to the symphony to this matters for all of us as a community and to anchor the arts environment in our city and in our county. And so I think we're realizing more and more how the check doesn't always get it done.
Right.
We got to activate.
Right. Everybody says money talks, and it does talk to some extent, but really it's people who talk. And you have so much power using your voice in partnership with other people. And the combination of all of these assets that you have, your investments, the choices you make every day, where you give your money, and how you use your voice and how you show up, that can make a lot of change. So, all right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.